Welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we're going to talk about the common misconceptions, in quotes, so to say, about the SharePoint framework. So kind of let's say, community statements which we're seeing floating around the SharePoint framework development, which we wanted to cover in the webcast. My name is Vesa Yvanen, I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me as the secondary presenter, doing also a live demo today, is Waldek Mastercard. So Waldek, will you do quick intros as well?
Yes, hey everybody, my name is Waldek Mastercard. I am Office Development MVP. I work at Rancor, and today we'll talk about common misconceptions about the SharePoint framework.
Indeed. So we have 3 slides where we wanted to kind of cover the most common statements which we're seeing all around the social media and around the SharePoint framework, and let's talk about those. So let's actually get ongoing on the slides right away. So the first, let's say, the statement which we're seeing quite often is that I cannot use Visual Studio for my development, which is actually false. Let's talk about this one slightly. It is something, the Visual Studio is obviously something what the, let's say, classic Microsoft developers especially have been using as part of the SharePoint development in the past. And we do absolutely understand the value of the Visual Studio development experience because the IDE is familiar for you as well. Now, the SharePoint framework concentrates on the industry standards with WebStack. And what it means is that we're aligning the SharePoint framework to the models which are being used in other platforms as well. And that's actually a great thing. We understand that there's a small learning curve for people who are moving into this section or this side, but after you've done that, you actually are not just a SharePoint developer, you can do other stuff as well. You can do development on the other platforms as well. Technically, you can choose what tools you'd like to use. So it's up to you to choose what is your development environment. It could be Visual Studio Code. Technically, it can be Visual Studio as well. And we'll come back on that one slightly more in a second as well. And also, you can use additional third-party extensions which are available for WebStack. And really one of the key points here is that the SharePoint development is also now cross-platform. So you can do SharePoint development on a Mac, on a Linux, on a Windows. You are not limited on a certain platform or certain technologies. And as part of Visual Studio development explicitly, we have released the Visual Studio extension for SharePoint Framework as an open source community-driven initiative. This is something what Eric Chops and Paul Schaffelin started doing, but we're looking into extending this group of people working on this extension as well. And that kind of hides the, let's say, in quotes, the complexity around the SharePoint framework templating model, so the German templates and color options and all of that. So Visual Studio extension for SharePoint framework is providing you a UI wizard for creating project solutions and by adding a web part in or an extension in to your solution. Technically, it's still using that WebStack standards and the open source tooling, but it's kind of being hidden in the sense from the Visual Studio IDE.
Yeah, so with that, I think that I would say that it does not hide complexity, but it brings back the familiarity of the UI that you've used until now for years.
Yes,
right?
That's true. Well, and technically, yes, there's some additional complexity. If you come from a farm solution development side, I wouldn't still consider this as a massive kind of a, oh my God, this complexity is killing me. Well, not really. It's not that complex. And it's relatively straightforward if you are willing to, I would go up to the level of saying if you're willing to accept the change. And this is where we're heading with SharePoint development. We would strongly encourage people to look into the SharePoint framework because it provides flexibility for your development in the future as well.
And also the fact that in order to build web parts, you don't need to know everything about everything. You just need to know the basics. You need to know SharePoint, the API. That's it. You don't need to know everything about Gulp and Webpack and TypeScript. The same way you don't know everything. You might not know everything about MS Build that you've used for years or that has been there around for years, but that you might have never touched because there was no need to.
Yes.
Right. So with that, if you think about it, there's only small part that you have to learn in place to be able to start development, but you definitely don't need to jump in deep at first and know everything about every single tool you're going to use or is being used in the tool chain.
No, absolutely true. And maybe that's actually even a failure within our messaging, because we've been always concentrating on the, hey, these are the tools, these are the things which you need to learn. Well, actually, no.
You don't.
Yes, exactly. The only thing what you should learn is the TypeScript development, which is, if you come from a, let's say, C# background, you can easily adapt that. And the TypeScript itself is bringing a lot of benefits for the development as well. We'll come back on that one after a few slides as well. But let's actually move on to another, let's say, a common statement around the SharePoint Framework development, or the SharePoint Framework ecosystem, so to say, which is, you need admin approval for development. What about these citizen developers? I want to have I just want to embed JavaScript on the script editor web part and put it on my page. What's with that? Why are you making this so difficult? Well, technically, this request is coming from our customers. And why is it coming from the customers is that if we think about the history of SharePoint Online, people have been able to just embed JavaScript there, and it might be working a while properly, and then the person who actually embedded the JavaScript has already moved on, is in a different company, and suddenly the site actually breaks. Why it's breaking up? Well, it could be a UI change, what we're pushing. It could be some other changes which are being pushed on the site, and all of that. And IT organizations or people who are supporting the SharePoint Online within your company have been then complaining around, hey, but this is bad. People are actually causing challenges for us and additional costs because we need for our support and maintenance, because we don't actually know what's there. People are just embedding crazy stuff on SharePoint Online, and when you land a different site or another site, you never know what's actually waiting there. Was it customized using SharePoint Designer? Was it customized using a script editor web part on a page or whatever? And having that control in a tenant level is really what has been what people have been asking, and what customers have been asking, to avoid those additional costs, which are related on these random rogue or random widgets and things which have been embedded on the sites. Now, right now, we are in the situation where the tenant administrator, tenant administrator, first of all, can delegate the permissions for numerous people to be able to add add-ins, essentially SharePoint Framework solutions, to the app catalog, so that they are available to be used in a tenant. In the future, the bullet point number 4, well, these are not technical bullet points, but anyway, in future, there will be even additional flexibility around this one. So we are working on a site collection level app catalog. It's now May 2017 when we're recording the video. Slightly depends on the timing when you're watching the video, is this already live or not. But the whole point is that the tenant administrator can, in a tenant level, say that it's fine within our tenant, within our deployment, that people are able to add SharePoint Framework solutions within their sites. And then that means that the site collection app catalog will be available for site collection administrators to enable, which will provide flexibility. You would still need to encapsulate your script or the customization to a SharePoint Framework web part, but that brings a lot of consistency as well. If we think about, let's say, the script editor web parts and content and editing web parts, how do you configure those? How do you modify that modification if you would have to go to the script level and do modifications? Client-side web parts are providing you a nice UIs to do that. And it is not difficult to actually take an existing widget, a JavaScript widget, and put it in the client-side web part. It does not require, let's say, magical skills or pixie dust to make that happen, so to say. Anything what I'm missing here, Waldek?
Well, one detail, right? Because many folks think that the additional level of control is required to protect companies from malicious developers, right? But many would say that that group is really small. I mean, you don't often encounter people who are truly malicious and want to harm you. But there's also a big group of people who either aren't that skilled in JavaScript and code, and they don't really know what they do. So that one, and that group is bigger, right? So these people do not intentionally want to harm you, but they simply do not know exactly what the code does, right? So they just grab a script or a widget from the internet, add it with the best faith to a page in order to help the business, and unfortunately, what they do is they do more harm with that, right? So that's one. And two, there's also the fact that even though you might know exactly what the script does and you would apply it securely to the page, if the IT does not know about it being there on a page and you move on, you either change team, change company, you move on, then if that script would change or break, or if it would anything break in that site or page, there's nobody who knows about that particular script there, right? Because the IT did not know about the script being there. True. Right, so it also helps everybody do their job more efficiently, and helps the IT to keep an overview of what's being run where, in what state, what is being done, what library, is it supportable, all of that, right? So sure. It's meant to help IT be more efficient about their work. Also.
And that's also one of the reasons why, by default, in the modern sites, in the modern experiences, there's no script editor web parts, there's no content editor web parts, because that's reducing the problems what this has been caused in the past as well. And that's based on the requests from the customers. So the SharePoint framework does provide more reliable platform, more consistent platform, more control for the tenant administrator how stuff are being done. So that's really key objective of the SharePoint framework.
Right. And I think that important thing there is that the admins still have the ability to say, I'm okay with that if everybody will be able to change a page or update a web part, right?
True, absolutely.
In theory, they have the power to do that,
yes.
Right? So it's not like it is either closed or open. It is up to admin to decide whether it's open or not. But True. It can be if they choose to.
Yes, absolutely. And then somebody might be saying on that particular thing that no, but our IT admins are so difficult to work with, and I can't justify just a random script on my site. If that's the case, then that's probably the company policy, and that's precisely what those admins. And if the company policy is that you shouldn't be doing that, well, then you probably shouldn't be doing that, because that's what your company people have decided. So it's not because of anyway, the SharePoint framework getting rambled on my head as well. But I think we can kind of conclude that this SharePoint framework does provide more control. It does provide more reliability, and still, if the tenant administrator or your owners of your tenant are deciding that there has to be flexibility, you can still do that. So that's absolutely possible as well. Now, one more statement before we do a quick demo. I need to rewrite everything into TypeScript. Oh my God, this is hard because I'm just using widgets and JavaScript widgets and it was so easy and blah, blah, blah. Well, you can actually use existing JavaScript almost as such in the client-side web parts. The client-side web part can act only as a shell to host your JavaScript customization, which could be a widget or whatever the customization is doing. So you don't explicitly need to learn TypeScript. There is benefits for doing that, transforming your existing code to TypeScript, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to do that. The benefits would be that you have a type checking, you have intelligence, you have a development time, much more, let's say, reliable way of developing your web part that it will work properly in development time already, rather than doing deployment testing. And you can absolutely move to TypeScript incrementally as well. So you don't have to flip everything automatically and everything what I have. You can gradually do the transition if you want to do so. And maybe we should do a better job on samples and guidance around how to do that in the future. And when you're doing the TypeScript development, when you're doing the development of Visual Studio Code or whatever is a chosen editor, you can control also the needed level of strictness with the TS-lint rules. So there are ways to actually adjust the behavior of the default build experience. Good. Anything you want to add here, Waldek?
Well, not really to add because you covered already everything, but I'd like to show you how you could really easily, without much effort, move existing Angular app written in vanilla JS to SPFX. How about that?
Let's quickly have a look on this one as a short demo, and let's then close up the webcast.
All right. So let's have a quick look at how you would migrate, or what would be the required effort to migrate existing AngularJS app built in vanilla JavaScript to an SPFX web part. So here you see, first of all, the contents of an HTML page. And the component that you're looking at in the Angular app is meant to be used as a script application that you would embed in script editor web part on your page. So all of this code, or actually a big part of it, would be just copy paste and included in the script editor or web part that would then load up the Angular app and which would show to-do items from a list, right? So here we have simple app with the module controller of the page loading the items, and then service that actually communicates with REST or through REST with the list API and gets the items. Right, and that's all vanilla JavaScript, the same way you would write it in the past, right?
Yes. Well, in this case, it's Angular JavaScript, but anyway, Angular.
It is JavaScript, so there's no TypeScript, no Babel, no CoffeeScript around.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now let's have a look at how would exactly the same thing look like being SharePoint Framework client-side web part. So here we have exactly the same project. If I open the source, here is the web part. And all of the app is included here. So I have exactly the same files that I had here. If you compare that, there is the config module service controller, and it's exactly the same here, config module service controller, and it's exactly the same code, right? There is one difference, and that's made actually to benefit of the fact that now we are in web part, and we have UI to control it. So we no longer need to, whenever we wanted to change the URL of the list or the name of the list or the number of items that we wanted to show on a screen, in the past, in the script editor or web part, the only way for us to do that would be to go to the code, edit the code, save it, and then imagine that a user would do that. They probably would not, because there's a risk that they might, by accident, delete some of the code and the whole thing would break. Right? So there wasn't really a user-friendly experience for them. Now with the web part, they have the property pane that they are used to, if assuming they work with web parts in the past, that it's the same UI that they used all over the place, right? And exactly the same place, the same way, they can now set up the Angular app through the UI. And that's the only thing that we had to change about the app. So or actually extend it to benefit of that additional UI layer that we have in web parts. So here the only thing that we change is in the controller, we subscribe to event that we raise in web part. So in web part, we raise an event. Whenever somebody would change settings in a web part, we raise an event and we receive that event in the Angular app. And here in the web part, and here in the web part, you can see that here is the render method, and here we raise that event. But other than that, you can see here that all of the files that I had in the past are still JavaScript. So I did not change anything of them. I did not include any typings. I did not include. I did not need to rewrite any code. This code is exactly the same way it was. I did not change anything about that.
Yes. So essentially, the web part is kind of acting as a shell, just to
put a shell. Yes.
On the page, and it will be then supported in the modern pages and modern experiences, and also in a classic experience.
Well. Yes, absolutely.
And that's actually one thing which is kind of off the topic, but it's one of the things what we're seeing that people are not actually even that aware. You can absolutely use the same modern web part then in the both modern and classic. So you can still use this code in the classic experiences as well, but it will be configurable by content editors who have permissions to edit the page. A big thing.
Yeah. So I mean that wraps up the demo. Basically, wanted to prove you that you can reuse the code that you've already had. And if you choose to, you can choose to benefit of the web part UI and extend the code that you've already had with these additional abilities to actually set up your widget or web part or whatever you have through the UI, and no longer need users to go to the code, change the code, inject the code, and then reapply it, right? Absolutely. Because that's just way more risky, if you will.
True. And just to kind of before we close the demo, can you go up and show how did actually it's the require statement. How did you associate the JavaScript files on the client-side web part? And that's the only thing what we've been essentially doing here. Now, this case, the Angular application is relatively complex if we compare to some of the widgets what we're seeing on the SharePoint pages. But the model would be pretty much the same if it's a random widget in jQuery, React, or if it's using whatever libraries, or if it's not using any libraries, it's just a native JavaScript file.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, often what you have is just a template to which you apply the data, and then some other place where you load the data from and apply it to template. And that's exactly what it is. That's basically the minimal setup that you would have in Angular. But if you would use jQuery, Knockout, Vue, and whatnot, setup would be basically exactly the same, right? You have template or you have element on a page in which you inject the data, and then you have another place in your code where you call out the API, load the data, and inject it to the page.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, let's flip back on the slides and close up the webcast. Thank you. Good. So that's around this webcast. We wanted to be relatively quick, just do a few statements going through which we're seeing floating around on the social media. This is more around education and covering and having an open discussion on these topics. We actually more than love to have this kind of discussions in a tech community, as an example, and to get that information out there. And obviously, we want to address these kind of questions and concerns also within our documentation at the devdevops.com/SharePoint. So please do let us know if there are concerns or things what you want to get validated around the SharePoint framework. Anything else what you want to add on the closing statements, Waldek?
Again, no, I mean, you covered already everything. We would definitely encourage you to reach out to us if there are any blockers or any things that you are concerned about or anything that you think would prevent you from doing your work efficiently. Reach out to us, let us know, and let's think together about what we can do about it.
Absolutely. Let's rather be open, transparent, and reach out to the source of the information, and let's solve those things together. That feedback is also super valuable for us in SharePoint engineering, so that we can address that either, for example, even by code changes within a SharePoint Online. So please do keep input coming. But I think that's it for this one. Thank you, Waldek, for joining me, and thank you, Waldek, for the great demo as well. And we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you.
Bye, guys.